What's up, guys? It's Aaron. You know me as Wolf Eat Dinner, and I'm here with,
I'm Josh.
and
I'm Austin.
he is known as Chill Guy Draws, and we're doing something a little bit different today. Usually I stream, but we wanted to try to get together and do a podcast. Um, we're going to be known as Knights of the Round Table. I'm going to be making some bumpers and stuff for us so we can do this semi-regularly if things go good.
I think the only problem with this is that you don't actually have a round table for us to do this.
More like a rectangle, but that's semantics.
Yeah. We'll take care of that later.
But I think we have a pretty good topic, and we're just going to talk for a few minutes. We're all new to the podcast territory, so it's a fledgling experience for everybody.
Now, to be fair, I've done a few podcasts back in my day,
We
but
don't
it's best
talk
we
about
not talk
those,
about
yeah.
those.
But we're all a pretty tight-knit group of friends, and we've been wanting to do this for quite some time now. We're all really passionate about comic books and geek culture as a whole, and this is something that we've been wanting to do, and we've just now been able to do it. So this is our inaugural voyage, if you will. So bear with us. There will be kinks that we'll have to iron out. But well, why don't you tell them what our first topic is today?
The topic that we're going to go with is basically not just comics, but kind of the geek and nerd culture that has fascinated many for years. Why it's so much bigger and more ubiquitous now. In this day and age, no matter where you see it in books, you see it in comics, you see it in film and television. Even some songs reference it, stuff like that. I mean, 20 years ago, I don't know how common of a fact it was that Bruce Wayne was Batman, but I can guarantee you it's not general knowledge like it is today. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and defer to Josh, and we're going to start rolling with some opinions. Why it's so.
Yeah, so I'm 23 years old, and I've been reading comic books since I was about 6 or 7. And I can even remember being, 9 or 10 years old, like in elementary school and middle school, comic books were still a relatively taboo thing that, like, say, for my tight-knit friend group, you couldn't just talk to anybody about Superman or Batman. It's not that they would look at you like you were a freak or something, it's simply that the interest simply wasn't there. And, with the advent of all of these, blockbuster summer superhero movies and, gangbusters television shows like The Flash, it's not like that anymore. You have we have a culture now that has chosen to fully embrace that geeky side. We've really jumped into the deep end, and that's not just with comic books. I can say the same thing for video games.
Dungeons and Dragons,
yeah, being a relatively taboo thing. What do you think, Austin?
Where I come from, comics weren't really anything per se. Like, my family wasn't really into comic books. I had this uncle that collected comic books, but I didn't know about that until several years prior. And until I started actively seeking out comic book stores, comics weren't really a big subject per se when I was growing up. Like, I had maybe one or two, but nobody really talked about them.
What do you think was like the straw that broke the camel's back? Do you think it was the Avengers movie? That is widely considered to be like a really big forerunner of geek culture being as popular as it is today. Do you think it's Comic-Con? Because Comic-Con's kind of blown up, and it's kind of grown with this geek culture rise.
I would say Comic-Con and the Avengers have had their hands in pushing geek culture into the limelight, but I don't think they were the pioneers per se, because technically speaking, Comic-Con did not really explode as much as it did until one horrible book series and then movie series decided to overtake it, and now it's this incredibly crowded
multimedia, it's kind of transcended
this horrible story about sparkling monsters decided to screw everything up. I wouldn't say the Avengers really started all that whole good superhero movies hitting the spotlight in mainstream, because technically speaking, Iron Man was kind of one of the bigger ones that...
Yeah, but Iron Man didn't do the kind of revenue...
No, not as much as Avengers, but I say once they started building up to say, oh, we're doing Avengers, people started realizing like, holy crap, these superhero movies are actually good. Because then you got movies like Thor and Captain America, Hulk not so much, but they all had their hand in starting this whole snowball effect.
So there is a case to be made, with that said, that it's simply a matter of exposure. That these characters weren't in the general zeitgeist of people's minds before then.
So speaking on that topic, I've been reading comics since I was 5 or 6 as well, and it literally took me until I was 19 to find somebody else who read comics as more than a passing trend.
Yeah.
That being said, I do remember growing up, and comics, even though it was an essential part of the media, it was a very different part. You had the fan flicky, 1989 Batman that had the 3 follow-ups. You had Superman years before with Christopher Reeves. Years before that, you had the Serial with George Reeves, but they weren't these huge pop icons like they are now.
You had Steel.
Yeah,
no. Great movie.
No.
Howard the Duck.
Just please quit. But that being said, on top of that, they were
Supergirl.
They were in the limelight, but like Batman the animated series, Superman the animated series, the X-Men, Spider-Man, there were all these cartoons in the 80s and 90s that were popular.
Yeah, that's the point I wanted to bring up, is that while live action per se wasn't that big of one, superheroes were killing it in the animated scene. Like, they've been around since the Super Friends.
I was going to say this. It was not pop culture. That was something that you sat your kids down in front of when you were a parent and you wanted a break.
That wasn't like a Nickelodeon's 90s
cartoon. It wasn't a staple. Those are all shows that have come to be revered as classics by comic fans today. You either grew up with them and loved them, or you've went back and watched them and discovered something fun and great.
Unless it was that's live action. Never mind. Because I was going to say Adam West.
Adam West was the first big exposure that Batman had, but
that was still only
kind of like Aaron's saying, that's syndicated television. We're not talking about, like big money franchise like it is now.
I mean, because if you debate things like that, Smallville to this day, fun fact, not only is it one of the biggest top grossing DC Comics franchises, it is the biggest Superman franchise that there has been to date as far as grossing money. But, it warranted 10 seasons, which is a pretty long stay by television standards, especially for a show that has a beginning and an end that's not sitcom based.
Oh, especially a superhero show.
It's a superhero show. It was the first many. It paved the way for the CW and stuff like that. But when superhero movies really started picking up, that was when the movies started picking up. That's when the rise kind of started.
And that's where I would give Avengers credit to, is that the rise started like after that whole shared success.
So you mentioned all the '90s cartoons like on Fox and on with Batman and Superman. Could we also attribute this rise then to a generational thing? Then do you think it's late 80s and 90s kids?
I mean, it could very well be something that we all grew up with, so we wanted to see it succeed as opposed to let go of it. Especially 90s kids. Now, this is a very well-known fact that studies in millennials especially have shown a strong sense of nostalgia. I, for one, do not think as a millennial that I kind of work or conduct myself on nostalgia, but there are some types of nostalgia that feel good, and I think everybody's going to long for that in some sense. As far as wanting to see comics succeed and watch them creep into pop culture, that has had nothing to do with nostalgia on my part, I can say.
I think there are good ways to use nostalgia, and there are corporate ways to use nostalgia.
Nintendo.
Oh, absolutely. But there's the nostalgia that can play on, you recognize these characters, we're going to do something different with them, don't get mad, but we're going to try something new. Like, there have been multiple iterations of the Justice League, Batman. Like, Batman alone has had multiple different incarnations in animation, and I think each one has their own sort of
strength.
Yeah. And they're not all Batman the animated series, but you've got shows like Batman the Brave and the Bold, you've got shows like The Batman, you've got shows like Batman Beyond. They're different takes on the same thing.
Honestly, I'm clearly a little biased. I'm a pretty big comic book fan, but I've always kind of been of the mindset that it was a matter of time before this happened. I won't say, on record that the superheroes have an indefinite shelf life, but I've always been kind of the mindset that superheroes are our modern mythology. These are stories that everybody can universally relate to. These are, stories you grow up on.
Which is kind of ironic for Thor because he's been around for a long time.
And I'm going to agree with Josh there, because there is one thing that another driving factor that I think has kind of contributed to comics in pop culture and in their ubiquity, and that is that everybody can relate to them. Not everybody's a reader. So now we have them in these high doses in the media.
They've kind of transcended the medium that they came from.
Yeah, and a lot of people who would not have related to them in comics are now relating to them on screen. And, that's another conveyor to why they're everywhere. But
like I said, that could be a good and a bad thing.
yeah.
To
talk about that for a minute, as somebody who has grown up with comics, to watch them on the silver screen is not always a great thing. Sometimes they're not done justice, and sometimes the fans that come from the silver screen iterations are a bit stale. Everybody has a.
It's definitely bittersweet. You're happy to see this thing that you're passionate about get the kind of exposure it is, and any kind of exposure in theory is good exposure. But at the same time, like, the inner comic book fan in me wants there to be a reverence for where these characters have came from, and not everybody embraces that, because you have varying degrees of fandom and varying degrees of investment.
Yeah,
So-
with the silver screen, you've got people coming in like, wow, this is a great movie. I kind of want to explore the character more. Like, where are the comics? I want to learn more about that. And then you got idiots like give Captain America a boyfriend hashtaggers.
Yeah.
I'm going to give a very weak example. If you've seen the Killing Joke animated film,
Ooh, that's a touchy one.
the first 30 minutes are very out of place. They have nothing to do with the comic book, which has become widely accepted as the Joker's canon origin story. I was in a used bookstore. I won't use any names. About a month after it came out, and there were two women who were talking, and it's okay to like a story, but
it's okay for women to like comic books too.
It's okay for anybody to like, comic books to the silver screen, but you're taking a piss when you're telling me an event that came from a movie, and you recall it happening in a comic book that was like clearly out of place because this lady was telling her friend that she should read The Killing Joke because it's a racy adult Batman story, which it is.
Yes.
But she really likes how Barbara was portrayed in the first of it, and the fact that her and Bruce were actually a couple and stuff like that. I'm gonna give a spoiler alert that everybody here at the table knows. In the comic book, that never happened.
No.
At least not in The Killing Joke.
Yeah. But just that being said, that's the kind of fandom that upsets, I think, a lot of comic readers. We've devoted our lives to it, and you have people thinking they can come in and get all the knowledge from movies.
And it's kind of a problem with the studios too, because you have situations where these studios are gentrifying the stories to make them easily accessible, and that's good and all, but sometimes it leans too far on the bell curve where you're watching this movie and it vaguely, if at all, resembles like what you went to see.
Yeah.
There is a right and wrong way to do it. I think Marvel does a pretty decent job, albeit they are a bit formulaic at this stage of the game. They do a good job of pleasing everybody, I think.
They're definitely steady with their films. They know what works, and they don't want to risk anything.
DC's still finding their footing, as we've all seen. Those of you that have seen Wonder Woman, it's pretty good, though. I mean, that's a step in the right direction.
You've seen the opposite effect with Suicide Squad.
I'm going to carry this over into like another kind of topic of discussion. We've been talking for a few minutes now, just shooting the shit about how popular geek culture and superheroes in particular have been in the last 5 or 6 years. You guys think there's a shelf life on this? When do you think the comic book bubble is going to pop?
Oh, I hate to think that, but honestly, it is probably going to simmer down. I'd say if not immediately or sometime after Infinity War, because people used to think like, oh, if Avengers is the epitome of the Marvel franchise. Then we got Thanos at the end of it, and you're like, holy crap, we're building up to Thanos, and now we're taking like 2 more phases to get through to him. Now DC is trying the same tactic with the Justice League, and we're wondering, okay, what could possibly be after that?
I'm gonna say this: comics have been a steady medium for their audience for almost 100 years now. There have been comics since the 1920s that have been steady selling and continue to steady sell. That being said, there might be a decrease in the popularity, but I think if the creative minds in the industry, the people behind these films and these books that we all know and love, if they continue to do a good job and treat these properties with the utmost respect, then we could see quite a bit of shelf life on it. Everything fades eventually.
Yeah.
I mean, 30 years ago we were using VHS, and now we're digital.
We have little computers in our hands.
Exactly. Things have a shelf life. It's human nature. We're always striving for the next thing. That being said, there are people who collect very ancient things, so I do believe that comics will have a fan base for a long time. I just think we're going to see a very big fan base shift in the near future.
Well, don't forget that comic books also had a shelf life for a bit too. When they first started out, because you had comic books that were mostly war story based. Like when they first started out, there was Superman,
pulps.
Wonder Woman, Captain America, like fighting Nazis and whatnot. And after a while, like that started to die down a little bit.
In the 50s, superheroes were almost completely dead.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You had a comic book market that was dominated by young romance books, funny animal books,
Monster
war
books.
monster books, and it really is peaks and valleys. It was the Flash. Barry Allen's introduction that is considered the spark of the Silver Age, and that was really the big superhero renaissance. That 10-year or so period, in the early 60s you get Fantastic Four, and that starts Marvel on their way.
Comic books reinvented themselves.
I see where you're going with this, and I think it is a peaks and valleys thing. I think it's just a question of are they going to retain. How many people's interest are they going to retain?
I'm not exactly sure with movies, especially
because comic book fans are faithful, no matter
Yeah.
you put them through hell and you ruin their favorite characters, and they still stay.
but you
A lot of
got
them.
movie fans that their tastes change over decades, because you've had like westerns, you've had space stories, you've had
People still avidly watch silent films.
oh yeah, but again, movie genres change over the
Right.
years.
And with movies, a big thing too is like anything that's going to make big money is going to warrant more attention from the studios, and so I think they'll succeed, and they'll at least plateau and be steady, if not make as much money as they do now, as long as studios let creators do their thing, but rein them in when they have to, like with a Zack Snyder or something. He needed to be reined in a little more.
Now,
and Sony really needs to just stop trying to make animated movies. They're not doing good.
let me
Watch the Emoji Movie coming this summer.
let me just say this: if you are an avid moviegoer and you do enjoy what you're seeing on the silver screen, always remember that a local comic book store is not that hard to find. And if you can't find a local one, shop Amazon. You can get some pretty cheap outings there.
A
I mean,
bookstore. Like,
yeah, a
bookstores are starting
bookstore.
to sell comics more avidly. now.
Anywhere. The point is that if you're not getting your fix on the silver screen, you're wanting to see more of like, where some of these stories are coming from. Comics are a good medium. They get downplayed more often than not. I mean, it's not as big of a problem as it used to be by far, but it is still a problem. People do tend to see the movie but never read the source material.
I think one reason for that is that to a new or fledgling reader, it can seem really daunting. And if you're one of these people that you really like the movies, you really like the video games, and you want to get into it, but you simply don't know where to start, there are tons of YouTube channels, there are tons of websites now.
Forums.
Comics are popular enough that if you were a beginner reader, somebody is out there that can point you to what you need to read. You have your seminal things like Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns and stuff that everybody should read just for the sake of reading it. But if if you have a favorite character and you don't know where to start, there is somebody out there that can point you in the right direction.
Very much so. That being said, does anybody else have anything to add to that subject?
Oh no, not
And
particularly.
I think I've said my piece.
Okay.
For the time
So
being, at least.
before we sign off, I would like to do something. I want to go around the table and I want us to all give a good, since we're talking about this, a good starting point for a fledgling comic reader. A good story, you know, a solid story, one that you don't have to collect, you know, 40 something issues to get the brunt of. Not even, but not a one shot, just the 3 or 4 chapter story or something that you can get a good, you know, read out of. So let's go ahead and do that.
Okay, what I'm going to suggest is on the Marvel side of things, and it is the aptly named Marvels. This is a great starting on point for anybody that's a big fan of the films. You get to see where these characters come from a unique POV perspective in the form of a character named Phil Sheldon. Through his eyes, you get to see the advent of the Marvel Universe as it was in the 60s and 70s, all the way up to the death of Gwen Stacy. Spoiler alert, but you know,
What?
it happens. Gorgeous art by Alex Ross. It was really, I would say, his mainstream breakout. Kurt Busiek does an excellent job at writing. They start all the way at the advent of Marvel from Marvel Comics #1 in 1939 with Namor and Human Torch. Go all the way up to the 70s. You get to see where all these characters came from. You get to see how people would react to them in the real world. I think that's the really special appeal to it. But that's my recommendation for those of you that want to dig a little deeper. That's a great place to start. Kurt Busiek, Alex Ross, Marvels.
I would definitely recommend Superman for All Seasons. I recommend it to almost all my friends who want to get into comic books. One of the reasons being, if you've never cracked open a comic book, Superman is an American icon. You know about Superman in some way, shape, or form.
He's apple pie. He's baseball.
Yeah. He's floated around for years. So this is a 4-chapter story that you can pick up relatively anywhere, collected in many forms. And it explores Clark Kent's first year of being Superman, his first rivalry with Lex Luthor, some family dynamics, and you get to see Metropolis and the town where he was raised, Smallville. It's a very good kind of origin story and a great place to start. Very accessible. I think anybody can dive into it. So Superman for All Seasons.
It's an excellent creative team too. Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. They are the modern day Midases. Everything they touch turns to gold. He's absolutely right. Superman for All Seasons is one of the best Superman stories out there. What about you, Austin? What's your recommendation?
See the Emoji Movie this summer.
No.
He may or may not have worked on the Emoji Movie. We're still...
No, but seriously, go grab yourself a new Teen Titans Omnibus. I tripped on my tongue there for a second, but
Omnibus.
you get the idea. Go read some classic George Perez, Marv Wolfman. Get a real good feel on your favorite animated characters.
If you were a fan and if you grew up with the cartoon from about 14 years ago,
Yeah.
And even if you watch the current one, I hate your guts, but go watch the. But go grab yourself a Teen Titans comic book.
you get to see where these characters come from. You get to see Beast Boy morph into the character that you know and love today. You get to see Starfire, Raven, Cyborg show up.
The birth of Nightwing.
Birth of Nightwing.
Deathstroke, probably one of the better DC villains.
You may know him as Slade. But yeah, that's a great pick. If you are a fan of the cartoons, go check out the new Teen Titans by Marv Wolfman and George Perez. You can find it in trade at almost any major comic
Oh yeah,
shop.
they should be releasing the Judas Contract novel too,
Yeah.
because of the new movie.
Well, guys, that being said, I hope you enjoyed the inaugural Knights of the Round Table podcast. Let us know what you think. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask. I'm Aaron.
I'm Josh.
Oh, I'm Austin.
And we will see you next time.